Now, a new release statement by the Iranian military says the commander of the Joint Armed Forces has met with the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei. They reportedly discussed the readiness of Iran's military. Let's find out more with Tohid Asadi, who's in Tehran for us. So what more do we know about what's come out of this meeting?
Well, actually, the gist of the matter when it comes to the rhetoric, military rhetoric in particular, that we hear from Tehran over the past few hours, I may say, is based on a sort of readiness and preparation for any confrontational scenario down the road following the series of attacks on Iran's coastal areas and oil tankers. Also, they are saying that the strategic patience period is over, fingers are on the trigger, and there are going to be tough repercussions in case of any miscalculation by quote-unquote the enemy, which runs the risk of further escalation in the Persian Gulf. This is what we hear from different military officials. We've got the spokesperson for the army, Mohammad Akraminia, coming out to say that if the enemy decides to attack Iran, there are going to be quote-unquote surprises by new weapons, new methods of warfare, and new arenas of war. Also, he warned against the countries which follow the United States to impose the sanctions on Iran, and he said that there are going to be difficulties for them transiting through the trajectory of the Strait of Hormuz. Also, we've got the state TV, as you were mentioning, reporting a meeting between the commander of the joint military headquarters of Khatamul Anbiya with Iran's new supreme leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, and then again they talked about the preparation, about confrontational scenarios and readiness to confront any quote-unquote hostile action by enemies. Also, the discussions there revolved around new measures and previous measures to deal with the enemy powerfully. And last but not least, we've got another line coming in from the Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian, who came out to say that the Iranian nation will never bow before its enemies, and whenever the idea of talks or negotiations are mentioned or raised, it is not for the sake of surrender, but for the sake of making sure that Iran can guarantee its rights. And that is obviously a sort of two-folded, two-sided statement that we hear from a statement from the Iranian side when it comes to this dilemma of confrontation for the war on the one hand and preparation for diplomatic engagement on the other.
Yeah, and so how significant, Tohid, is this meeting between the head of Iran's military and the supreme leader? Do we know who else the supreme leader has met? Because he's been pretty much absent from the public since his appointment as supreme leader.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Since his appointment, we haven't seen any public appearance from the Iran's new supreme leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, and whatever we have from him is based upon written statements and news reports coming from Iranian local sources. But the other day, we also have reports about the Iranian president Masoud Pezeshkian having a meeting with the new supreme leader, which he called very constructive. Also, the recent meeting is another important signal, because based on the report that we have, the discussions there revolved around the military confrontational scenarios, and that is sending out the message that the country is not that much positive when it comes to actually a negotiated settlement, while officially speaking, the line that is coming is based on prioritizing diplomacy over confrontation. However, what we hear from this report and other reports and the entirety of the literature and the gist of the matter from the military officials is that there is this full preparation. And in that meeting specifically, they talked about that. They talked about new measures, as I mentioned earlier, and continuation of the previous measures, plans, strategies, tactics to make sure that the country can sustain this maximum level of preparation in case of another confrontation, which is potential. Seeing recent escalation, something that is important and something that is being critically observed from the Iranian side.
On the diplomacy, Tohid, where do things stand? The Americans were expecting an Iranian response to the latest U.S. proposal on Friday. That still hasn't happened. When is Iran going to respond?
Well, first things first, it seems that the two sides have decided not to spill the beans when it comes to details of negotiations. And of course, it goes without saying that if we just juxtapose the plans or proposals proposed by the Iranian side and those of the American side, we can understand that the two sides are poles apart. There are too many points of contention when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz and the US blockade on the one hand, when it comes to the nuclear dossier and sanction relief on the other hand. These are two controversial bilateral issues, but in addition to that, we know that the list of demands, the list of controversies are not limited to those items that I mentioned when it comes to war reparations, when it comes to Iran's regional relations, when it comes to frozen assets of the country, the security assurances that Iran is looking for to make sure that it's not going to get trapped into a vicious circle of war, peace or ceasefire, and then another round of confrontation. These are some controversial issues out there, and to that we have to add two certain important elements. First, the cloud of mistrust that is out there, specifically when it comes to Tehran's vantage point. They're saying that it's not easy at this circumstance for them to rely on Americans, to trust in Americans, and to sort of have a sort of a minimum trust that any deal reached at the end of the day is going to be translated into real action. And on that, we know that Iranians were engaged in negotiations over the past 1 year, not once but twice, while their country was targeted all of a sudden unexpectedly by the Americans and Israelis, A. And B, we know that added to this parallel line of diplomacy, we've got the parallel line of military rhetoric. And on that, as I was explaining earlier, the country is saying, and not only the country but also the American side, both are saying that fingers are on the trigger. They are ready for another round of confrontation should negotiations fail.
Thank you very much, Tohid, for the update. That's Al Jazeera's Tohid Asadi live in Tehran.